Hello everyone, Ruby Rovell here, a naughty nereid, luring you onto seemingly stable ground, only to turn it into a rapacious floodplain the moment you step on it, so that you are engulfed by a maelstrom of emotions, a typhoon of feeling and imagery. Here to talk to you today about the Sun in opposition to Neptune, and to understand the relationship between these two planets when they are in opposition, I want to take a moment to explain why the Sun and Neptune naturally are inimical or tend to clash with one another, but as well as the different ways in which they can support and act as a counterweight to one another. The Sun for us is a symbol of the shining consciousness of a totally realized individual being. Before we are born, we live in the pre-birth realm of Neptune's infinite waters, in the mysterious amniotic fluid of our mother, from which our cells gradually flourish into something that we recognize as being mortal and human from just that strange fluid potential. And when we are born and are separated from our mother, it takes a while before our consciousness actually catches up to the fact that we are an individual being, because to begin with, we are so dependent on our mother for her nurturance, for her milk, for her love to ensure our survival, that we can't really separate our ego from hers. We are an extension of her. The physical umbilical cord may have been cut, but the spiritual, emotional one is still very strong, because we do not yet have the power, the potency, or the personal resources to actually take care of ourselves. There can't really be any individuality. Whereas once a child grows strong enough that it can start to move for itself, it can think for itself, it can talk for itself, that's when our emerging light begins to say, okay, I am not just a carbon copy of my mother. I am not just a clone or a simulacra. I am someone with my own light, with my own essence, with my own quintessence, with my own purpose. And part of the realization of my life will be to discover that and realize it in the best possible way. And the Sun at the zenith point of noon represents someone who has managed to become themselves. So when we are talking about the Sun in astrology, we are not saying that someone is their sun, is their solar sign to the exclusion of everything else going on in their chart. Rather, the Sun represents the ordering principle, the center of ourself around which everything else can orbit. Because we are so complex, because we are so multifaceted and contradictory, we need that sense of having some kind of internal kinship or queenship that puts everything together as an holistic whole. Before we fully realize our Sun, it can sometimes feel like all the different planetary instincts that are taking place within us are constantly at war. If we look at Greek mythology, we see that Jupiter and Mars and Mercury and Venus and Kronos and all the other gods weren't known for being very democratic or harmonious with one another. In fact, they were almost always squabbling. And our inner planets have a tendency to squabble too. Venus says, let's do this, that sounds beautiful and nourishing to my heart. The moon wants to do this because that's what it feels, fulfills its emotions and makes it feel safe. Mars is pursuing what makes it feel powerful. Jupiter is off on its old religious zealotry and mania. And it can sometimes feel that we are someone being drawn in 12 different directions by all these different winged chariots that are tearing us apart. The Sun is there so that we have some kind of inner anchor that can tame and give a sense of rulership and sovereignty to everything else, so that everything is kind of transmitted and processed and ultimately decided by that main central purpose and raison d'etre that the sun provides. He is the monarch, the Caesar, the emperor of our inner democracy that keeps all of our different feudal states in check, so that we aren't constantly in upheaval and rebelling against ourselves. The sun represents the desire to civilize ourselves, to turn our inner self into some kind of united empire, rather than just lots of barbarian mini-states that are always lobbing bombs at one another. But getting in touch with our sunlight isn't always easy, because it means developing self-consciousness, self-awareness, being able to confront the luminous totality of who we actually are and what our purpose in this life is. And what that purpose is may be very different from the instinctual habits and responses that we feel more closely and intimately when we are first growing up. Because when we are first growing up, it would be much easier to say that we are our moon signs rather than our sun signs. And for some people, that remains almost constantly true. Because the moon is the automatic, animal, emotional, and reactive side of us, it doesn't require conscious thought or mediation. We just immediately are our moon. It is the inherited emotional matrix that we descended from in terms of the general energetic environment of what life was like growing up. When we grow up in a particular environment or subjected to certain emotional atmospheres or styles of upbringing, we tend to take that as normality, as the rule for how reality functions. How our parents are and how they treat us typifies our understanding of how things should be, and our moon consumes that wholesale and says, yes, my parents were this way, the emotional matrix from which I emerged was this way, so I will be this way. But as we become more in touch with our sun, we may realize that the way in which we have to develop as an individual, instead of just remaining a dependent factor of our familial lineage, may be pulling us in a very different direction, and that in order to achieve our personal purpose, rather than just being a carbon clone of our mother, father, or whatever maternal or paternal figures raised us, we have to go in a very different direction, which may be lonely, which may be akin to the ancient myths of the solar hero fighting the primordial dragon who wants to pull us back into the swamp of completely merged and fused identity with that mysterious collective mass and amniotic fluid from which we originally arose. But once we do achieve the fiery potential of our sun, once we do feel like we've gotten to grip with who we are, whether we like it or not, and the things that we are meant to do in this life in order to fulfill our potency, our potential, our fate, our weird, our destiny, whatever you want to call it, it's very easy to become attached to that, because if we've spent so much of our life just swimming in those lunar oceans and islets, feeling confused and bemused and led by every last dream and fantasy and emotional illusion after another, once we finally have that eureka and aha moment of, this is who I am, this is my personal hero's journey, this is what I have to achieve in this world, we can very much want to keep a hold on that, because suddenly everything is ordered. There is a sense in which reality is clarified, that out of all of the infinite different paths we could go down, we have found our own Tao, we have found our own way, we have found the route and the approach and the heroic style that works for us because it intrinsically, inherently and autonomously is us. That there's no denying it. That is the person we see in the mirror. That is the fire that we find at the center of ourselves. When we find our sun, we feel empowered, but we also feel clarified, because then it helps to contrast us with what we are not. We don't have to waste so much time pursuing fruitless avenues and cul-de-sacs and one-way streets. We found the path that is uniquely our own, and we reconcile ourselves to it. And the sun is a perfect symbol of clarity, because when we look in the sky, there's never any doubt about what the sun is. It is this clear, luminous, shining disk that temporarily makes all the stars and nebulae and galaxies that are flittering around behind it disappear. It is itself, its outline is clear and totally unambiguous. So we want to hold on to that, because once we have that, life makes sense and it's more manageable, and we have a greater knowledge and intuition about what it is that we can do. So when Neptune comes along and starts bringing confusion and fog and doubt and uncertainty and mystery and nebulosity into that clarity, when it seems to be trying to pull us back into those waters of confusion from which we've fought so hard to separate ourselves, Neptune opposed to the sun can feel like a threat. And this is true of any opposition. To me, oppositions, when planets are separated by 180 degrees with a 10-degree orb of influence on either side, it's the aspect of both lovers and enemies. Because when we have an opposition between two planets, there's very often the temptation to side with one point of the opposition and to reject the other as not belonging to us. And therefore, it's something we tend to look down upon, but which we can also look up to and place on a pedestal. Because we've disowned it, we can be frightened of it, and yet also crave it at the same time, because we desire it and feel malnourished from it, and therefore yearn for it, but are also afraid of possessing it and truly incorporating it on ourselves. So the loathed or disowned Neptune can easily be displaced on one's enemies, but also on the lovers and friends and idols that one worships and feels ineluctably drawn to. So whilst the sun represents having fully achieved the alchemical goal of having a unique, authentic, integral self that separates you as a unique individual being from the rest of infinity, Neptune and its mysterious waters seem to be pulling you back into that infinity. Neptune is symbolized by the sea, by the ocean that is never the same thing twice, which is always moving and undulating and mutating. It is this great Phonian shapeshifter, constantly taking on one form and then dissolving back into an ocean of infinite possible forms. Someone who identifies more with Neptune rather than the sun has a sense of having an infinite range of possible selves. It is not one individual being, but it is the vessel for whatever cosmic, supernal, supernatural or spiritual forces decide to be channeled through it. And because of this, people who are very Neptune have a very fluid sense of identity and can often have the habit of either mirroring and in some way becoming whoever it is they are around or whoever they love or are attached to. Because Neptune desires cosmic fusion, cosmic oneness, to experience this great communion of the soul, when it is with other people, it often wants to become them by mirroring them, so that there is no longer a sense of I and other, but everything has become perfectly interfused. You know, we can think about two bodies meeting, but if those bodies were turned into water, they could then just flow effortlessly into one another, so that you had no sense of where one person ended and another began. That is the bliss that Neptune is always seeking, and for which it feels an ineffable divine sorrow anytime it is aware of its separateness or loneliness or saturnine division from other people. Neptunian people, for this reason, often can make fantastic artists and musicians and actors, because they don't have that conscious barrier that is separating them from that realm of infinite inspiration, because they don't have these walls of consciousness and rationality and too hard thought and cerebration getting in the way of their relationship with the infinite, with the endless imagination of God. All of those ideas and thoughts and feelings and poems and operas and their ability to empathize with other states of consciousness can enter into them fluidly, because they are already swimming in that ocean of the collective consciousness. That is the natural realm in which they live. And yet the difficulty sometimes can be actually just holding on to that, actually just being one thing rather than every possible thing simultaneously. And sometimes that awareness of being so much, of potentially being so much, can lead to them feeling emotionally and psychically and spiritually overwhelmed. It's almost like the Neptunian person has no real structure, no real boundaries, no harbour walls that stop it from being one thing or another. So whilst Neptunian people can often seem to be blessed with a kind of fairy or elven magic, to be these creatures who are more at home in the other world rather than this one, to be these great dreamers, these visionaries, these poets who can see beauty and tragedy and the infinite in a grain of sand, like William Blake, their love of that other world, their love of the imagination, which feels so solid to them, can often mean that the physical world of stuff, of things, of the senses, of matter, of work and money and bodily incarnation, conversely doesn't feel real to them. It's that world of physical stuff that feels false and unreal and deceptive and untrustworthy. The idea that reality is an illusion is very much a Neptunian one. To the Neptunian world, the imagination is the only truth. Beauty is the only truth. Whatever brings them a sense of total oneness with God and the universe is the ultimate truth. Everything else just feels like a lie or an obstacle that is getting in the way of that desire to feel that soul communion. You know, you can watch a Neptunian person walking down the road sometimes, and what they're really doing is swimming in consciousness. They're not really looking at the world outside them. They're not seeing the lamppost. They're not seeing the concrete on the street. They're probably not thinking about the bills to pay. They are just in an endless oceanic state of free-from dreaming. And when the Virgo sun sees these people, it's the opposite of what that person is striving to become. Because Virgo sun identifies with its body, with its productivity, with its actions, with its ability to find a useful form of service and utility in the world, and with its ability to master both its thoughts and its body. It identifies with its mind, and it identifies with its physical form. Those are the things that it takes to be real, to be the ultimate reality. And anything that doesn't fit within those earthy and airy elements is looked at with cynicism and curiosity at the same time. Because Virgo is driven to be efficacious, to be efficient, to be serviceable, to be a good worker, and to be a good thinker, it is often afraid of the vague, woolly realm of feelings and dreams, because those spoil the intellectual and physical clarity that it is searching for. When you have built up this complex system of ideas and theories and hypotheses and philosophies and this carefully cultivated inner library of knowledge, you can have that solar sense then of understanding the world through the books you've read, through the courses you've been on, through the skills you've developed. And when Neptune comes along and says that all of those ideas are illusions, then it calls your whole life into question. And so some Virgo people just wanting to be good workers, wanting to be efficient, can be afraid of that realm of emotion that pulls them away of the purity of being themselves. Some Virgoan people are very isolated or solitary beings because they want to be so true to themselves that they are very unreceptive to those collective influences. You can often speak to Virgoan people about mass trends, about fashions, and they'll look at them scornfully and with a sort of scoffing disgust, because their modus operandus is to become themselves as a unique individual whose ideas and whose uniqueness has come solely from their own work and their own self-development, rather than just merely fitting in with the mass trends that they see around them. You know, mass trends in many ways are very Neptunian, because if you like all the same TV shows and films as everyone else, if you follow the same fashion trends as everyone else, if you listen to the same music as everyone else, through those shared values and loves and likes and dislikes and hopes and dreams and fears, when you can say, I like all those same things that everyone else likes and dislikes all the same things that everyone else likes, it can give you a sense of communion with the rest of humanity, that wherever you go, you can swim in the same waters and easily identify with anyone else going around you, because you haven't done anything to separate yourself from that collective ocean. Whereas Virgo wants to step aside from that. It can see that there is a danger in mass movements, that there is a danger in hysteria, that there is a danger in not being questioning, and not being critical, and not being discerning, in not asking questions about the validity or the healthfulness or the practicality of a lot of these popular ideas and motions and trends. It can see that, you know, just as that the masses are more than capable of doing terrible things when they run away from thinking too much about things. So the Virgo is often an outsider and yet quite comfortable in that role. And yet when it sees Neptune there on the other side of the sky, it may also feel some sense of sadness, some sense that it is missing something, that its life of routine and study and contemplation and work is somewhat dry, somewhat barren, somewhat arid, that it is lacking magic, it is lacking enchantment, which Neptune is potentially willing to offer it. So with oppositions, until we've come to terms with them, it can often feel like we have to choose between one or the other, that one gets to be the good guy, one gets to be the bad guy. You know, one gets to be the rational hero and other is projected as the devil, or Mephistopheles, who is also the sexy, unavailable lover. But what we really need to do with all oppositions is to find a synthesis and a meeting point between both of them, to see it as this seesaw that we have to balance. If we side with one side and ignore the other, then we tend to go through this enantiodromia, where we flip between extremes of denying one and then throwing ourselves into the other and denying the other. Whereas we need to find this meeting place between them. We need some of the Sun in Virgo's strong sense of self, strong sense of boundaries, of purposefulness, of practicality, of having a critical mind, of being okay and happy and content in the cultivation of its integrity and solitude. But we also need some of the magic and enchantment of Neptune. We need the ability to not always be so hard and self-contained and solitary, but to have an ability to be receptive to those collective waters, so that we can feel a greater sense of connectedness with the rest of life as we know it and don't know it, to be connected to the world of fantasies and dreams. If we reject those realms, life can seem too dull, too arid, too boring, too routine. We can feel that life is just a rather repetitious mortality and nothing more. We need that enchantment to bring to life the phantasmagorical possibility of colours and creativity that exists around us beautifully and terrifyingly at every moment. Neptune can offer us that. Someone who can find that meeting place between the Sun in Virgo and Neptune in Pisces can be an efficient, practical, skillful person, and yet also a wonderful, receptive dreamer and imaginer. We don't have to choose, we can be both. But one of the main reasons that Virgo fears Neptune is that when it's put all that hard work into being itself, into being its own individual, and Neptune seems to come along and starts making all those well-defined boundaries and borders of our personal life blurry and ambiguous and frayed around the edges, it can feel like all of that self-knowledge and all of that self-awareness is being revealed as something rather futile and flat. It can make us feel like we are being sucked back into that cosmic swamp that we have sought to distinguish ourselves from. But also Virgo wants to be self-sufficient, it wants to be independent, it wants to be in control of itself. And Neptune often wants us to encounter more of the world through being willing to let go of ourselves. You know, the Sun and Earth signs can have too solid a sense of self sometimes, to the point where they feel encaged in their prison of clay. They are so consumed by their own sense of mortality that they leave no room for magic and dreams, or for the ability to feel too closely to anyone else, except merely as a separate body meeting another separate body. They lack that ability to make mystical contact, to enter feelingly into a connection with someone else, because their I and their ego, which is too solid and earthly, is getting in the way. Neptune can help to soften those edges, help to soften that uptightness of being too rigid a container. It can melt that clay and make things feel a bit more flowing. But to do that means letting go of someone's self-control, of letting go of the absolutism of their self-knowledge. It means accepting that what we don't know about ourselves, what we are ignorant of in our own hearts, will always exceed the finiteness of whatever we do know. And that being receptive to that, even if it can temporarily confuse us and bewilder us, can actually increase our knowledge by deepening our awareness and understanding of the different ways in which life can be experienced. But there is that fear that Neptune makes us feel helpless, that it makes us feel vulnerable, that it makes us question our self-sufficiency and puts us in these states where we actually need other people. Sometimes it can do this through making us sick, sometimes it can do this by overwhelming us with feelings of melancholy and depression. You know, whereas Virgo wants to be this person who does everything for themselves and by themselves so that they never have to ask anyone for help, Neptune often puts us in positions where we have to reach out, where we have to ask for help. And while Virgo feels that this may be humiliating, sometimes approaching someone else with humility, with saying, I'm not this perfect person who's always got everything perfectly ordered and systematized, can be something that makes another see you more deeply. It can make them respect you more deeply because you no longer seem like this pristine image, but something real and fluid and a bit more movable that they can actually connect with and touch and recognize themselves with in some way, just as Neptune can see itself in everyone and everything. Sometimes the sun in Virgo can see nothing but itself, and this is true to a degree of all sun signs. When the sun is fully realized, yes, it empowers us, but it can also make us too consumed by the solidity and light of our own ego. We all need to go through those regular periods where that ego is taken away from us. You know, when Prometheus stole the solar light from the gods, he was punished for it because he had taken something divine and identified with it. And there is a sense sometimes of that being true for our sun as well. You know, we can be so infatuated with our own divinity, with our own godliness, that we look down and sneer at anyone who hasn't found that, autonomy, who hasn't found that self-sufficiency and self-reliance. Neptune is humbling because it reminds us that all it takes is an unknown flood from another world to change our world overnight, to take away all the castles and crenellations that we've built and to return them back to the blank, undulating canvas of the sea. The only thing that separates many of us from the madhouse sometimes, and from poverty, and from social exile is luck and good fortune. You know, one of the arrogant and unlikable qualities I find sometimes with Virgo suns, and I have Virgo sun as well, so I'm speaking also from myself, is that Virgo is so in touch with its ability to do things, to learn new skills, to reinvent itself according to the practical needs of a moment, that when it sees someone struggling with a practical skill or with developing something that they need to do for their own survival, they think that person's just being weak, that they're not trying hard enough, that they're not putting in enough work or firepower to developing those skills that they need. When a person in that Neptunian way says, I don't know what I'm doing, I feel helpless, I feel overwhelmed, I don't feel capable of dealing with the physical world right now, some Virgo sun people can go, well, that person's just being weak. They're just being pathetic. They're just being lazy. If they were a good, orderly person like me who got up at 6 and did their accounts and then went for a jog and had a good breakfast and then put in a solid 9 to 5 and then came back and read an improving book, well, then they would be a better person. Then the whole of the world would be a better place instead of all these people going mad and having mental health problems. You know, all they need is a good, solid, sensible life and a lot of hard work, and all of those problems would clear up overnight. And when the Virgo sun experiences Neptune for itself and experiences the intoxication and the euphoria and also the tragic horror of that other realm, it realizes that actually, that there are many things we can control in this life. In the flick of a switch and the flash of a moment, all of that self-control can be totally undermined by illness, by tragedy, by mental health problems, by spiritual experiences that cause our physical perception of reality to be borne into question. There are many forces in this world that are much bigger and much greater and much more bewildering and incomprehensible than we are. And all it takes is one of those genie or demons from another realm to just touch us and enchant us for a moment. And everything that once seems solid and orderly and contained and comprehensible can be turned into this strange, hideous dream that undermines us at every angle. No one is safe from the magic curse of Neptune. He can reach any of us at any time. He can always pull us into that oceanic fog. And we are only relieved from that fog when he has decided we have done the soul work, we have done the spiritual work, we have understood our totality with humanity and been humbled by it instead of always being attached to the egotism of our central light. We need that central light to give us shape and direction and momentum in this world. But we also need those periods where, like Odysseus, those periods are defined by those ones in which we are out to sea, in which we are humbled by our helplessness, in which we are reminded of our mortal insignificance, which enhances our divinity by contrast with that, which forces us to place faith in things that are greater than ourselves, instead of assuming that our solar light is the God who can fix everything through hard work. Sometimes you have to let go and surrender to the tides. You have to let the ocean carry you where it will, and understand that no matter how much you thrash in those waves or try and build a raft while you're being busy drowned in the ocean, when Neptune comes along, you have to go along with those tides. And sometimes it may be for your greater personal development. You know, the conscious mercurial mind of Virgo can sometimes always feel that it knows better because of how much it has studied, because of how much it has learned. But there is always more to be learned, there is always more to be studied, and there is a great deal of wisdom in this world that can't be found in books, that can't be found by, you know, watching tutorials or going on university courses. There are things that can only be experienced through surrendering the ego and being willing to contact realities that are other than this one, and yet which are always constantly dreaming and feeding into this one and bringing it into being. Anyway, I'm going to leave that there. Hopefully that made some kind of sense. Not always an easy thing to convey when we are dealing with Neptune, who rules divine nonsense and madness, but there we are. Please like, share and subscribe. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them below. If you want to share your stories, if you have this opposition in your own charts, I would love to hear from you, or just in general, if you have anything that you'd like to share, please do so. If you'd like to contact me for an astrological reading, you can email me at thestarsunraveled@outlook.com. You can follow me on Instagram at astrologyinunderwear, and you can support me on Patreon at www.patreon.com/thestarsunraveled. Happy sailing in that maelstrom.